Wasabi guys, Void here, wanting to start yet another series. This one's going to be helping newer players to the format have fun. Considering this is one of the most popular formats and it's one of the quickest growing formats in the entire game, we have a ton of new players every single year it seems. Whenever they have the new pre-con decks, all these new players show up, they buy them, and they usually start out with those decks. And because we have a huge player base that is made up of these newer players, we have a lot of people that just are unsure about what decks to make beyond just the precons. So hopefully with this series, I can help these people out, these people who want to make a more competitive deck or have more fun with Commander. That's the most important part, is that you have fun. And unfortunately, some people just don't know how to have fun. So if you just don't enjoy the game, chances are you're probably not going to like it regardless. But if you are having struggles with this format, let's say you keep losing games, multiplayer, you get ganged up on, no matter what you do, you just can't seem to win any games. Now this video isn't going to be about the only way that you can improve your play or you can have more fun. This is going to be addressing your play style, linear and non-linear. You of course have different deck types. You have aggro, control, combo. What I mean by linear, your deck, all the cards that you put into it are all focused around one specific strategy and they don't deviate from that strategy whatsoever. We see this pretty commonly with monocolored decks because they're some of the easiest decks to build, and a lot of new players enter the format building these decks because the land base is incredibly easy to build, very cheap, usually don't need a lot of fetch lands or anything like that. So the cost to entry with monocolored decks, pretty cheap. So you see a lot of players playing with these, and also the strategy isn't really going to deviate from anything or any one thing in particular. It's usually just, okay, let's go with tribal, and here are some tribal creatures, and that's about it. But when I'm talking about linear decks being rather weak in the format, I am talking about Voltron. In a multiplayer game, Voltron usually gets hated out pretty early. Not always. You can still have fun. You could play a little bit more moderately with a Voltron deck, but it's not unusual to see these decks bow out earlier in the game just because they lack resources, they lack the recovery that a lot of other decks are capable of producing. So if this sounds like your playstyle and you're new to the game and you've been rocking with a Voltron commander, don't be surprised. This happens with just about everybody who commits to one specific playstyle. The longer you play this game, the sooner you will realize that it's not just about one specific playstyle to be comfortable with, but rather being comfortable with as many as possible. I think it's important to at least try to master as many different playstyles as you can because it helps you become a better player in the long run, not just in Commander but in other formats. As this game continues to evolve, you never know what's going to happen. So if you are incredibly good at playing Voltron and that's just about the only deck that you're used to playing, it's the only deck you feel comfortable with, well, maybe it's time to move out of your comfort zone into something that is capable of responding in multiple different ways rather than just putting one big creature out there and trying to swing for commander damage. Now let's talk about what it means to have a non-linear deck. If you've heard me mention Prosh Skyrider of Care before, it's probably because you watched me a billion times, and I say him all the time it seems. And I do it for a good reason, because there's so many different ways that you can win the game with Prosh. It's not just a token deck, it's not just a creature deck, it's also control, it's also combo. There's multiple different ways you can win. You can win off of damage triggers. That's why I absolutely love this guy. He's one of my favorite commanders of all time because it always seems like there's something new I can do with him. Same thing goes with Durov Imperial Tactician. Very similar to Prosh when it comes to just versatility and being able to interact with multiple different cards. You can go with a more aggressive creature-based deck focused around tapping down your opponent's mana. It's quite aggressive. You can make a stacks build using that strategy in mind. Or you could go with Bant Control because you're playing pretty decent control colors. You have great removal in both white and green. But yeah, just another example of a commander where you can go into multiple different directions. You can even look at one of the newer options in Inala Archmage Ritualist, seeing as yes, she is also a tribal deck, and what I've said about tribal decks before, they tend to be very narrow and specific to one strategy. However, this strategy works out pretty well with control, with combo. It's not just about the wizard tribe, but rather card advantage, because Grixis is also pretty good control colors as well. If we were to look at something like elves or goblins, mono green, mono red, there's not a ton of options within just one color and making a tribal deck only makes it a more specific linear strategy. Now, my advice to people who are used to playing with a more linear strategy would probably be experiment with multiple colors. Experiment with 3-color decks, 4-color decks, maybe even 5-color decks. The more colors that you put into your deck, the more likely it is that you're going to have more options. This is probably the easiest way to do it. If I'm playing white, I have good creature removal, I have good exiling removal, I even have some good artifact enchantment removal. If I'm playing green, I usually have pretty good non-creature removal. If I'm playing black, I usually have some good creature removal. If I'm playing blue, I might be able to bounce some stuff, but more importantly, I'm able to draw cards and counterspell. And if I'm playing red, I usually have a way to disrupt the game, make it a little bit harder for my opponents, but also be able to deal with artifacts for the most part. So as you can see, if you combine 2 or more of these colors together, you have even more answers than you would if you just had one of these colors in a deck. So right there, that's the easiest advice for anyone who is struggling between linear and non-linear playstyles. The more diverse your deck is, the more things you can do. It's just that simple. Now on to just the costs of these decks. Just to let you guys know, commander decks, yeah, you can technically make a commander deck for under $150, but on average, it's very difficult to do that and have a playable and slightly competitive. We're not even talking about a deck that is capable of winning regularly, but rather one that is capable of winning some games occasionally. And that's the most important part, is that your deck is capable of winning some games, not all games. In fact, if you're playing a 4-player game on average, you're likely not going to win the majority of your games anyway. So imagine what it's like playing with a super budget deck. The odds are not on your side, unfortunately. Sometimes you just need to rip the band-aid off, buy a bunch of these cards if you have your money saved up. You don't have to go crazy and build multiple different commander decks, but if you can spend a year or 2 at a time just piecing together a deck, making it as optimal as possible, what you'll end up with is a very good commander deck, and you know how to play it because you spend a ton of time not only putting it together but also playing it from start to finish, from when you feel the most comfortable with it to all the way back when you just started putting it together and you just didn't know what the heck you were doing. It just takes a comfort level to get used to. And sometimes you have to go from playing the more aggressive Voltron style to playing something a little bit more like Control with Oloro. It's not just about life gain, it's also about control with counter spells and removal spells. You can even go with combo decks, because not all combo decks are specifically designed just to combo. There's also other ways to play those decks, and a lot of those decks are capable of going into the late game and surviving that way. Now, as far as specific commanders go, I can't really give a recommendation beyond what I've already said in this video because it's very subjective. You can take just about every single commander and make it linear, and you can take just about every single commander and make it non-linear. There's really no way to tell you, oh, just because you have multiple different colors, that means your deck's going to be better than a monocolored deck. That's not always the case. It does come down to your own preferences, your own decisions. I can't tell you exactly what to put into your deck because I'm not you. I can't magically just make you feel better playing these cards, especially if you don't feel it, if you're not used to the play style and you're just not having fun. Well, maybe it's just not for you. And some people are just not capable of investing money into this game more than $150, which, you know, that's perfectly reasonable. That's understandable. It is a card game, and if you are still not sure about it yet, then that's perfectly fine. We do have a format where there's Mana Crypt, you know, ton of expensive cards, but still, a lot of play groups I know are very casual in nature, and they don't try to push it to the limits. So anyway guys, hope this was a help to you if you are new to the format. If you are struggling in this format and you're just trying to figure out what deck you should make next, hopefully this video was a big help to you. This is not going to be my last video on the topic. I plan on giving out more commander advice in the future, and it's definitely going to go beyond just play styles but more into specific cards. So anyway, you guys have a wonderful day. Void here, signing off.